What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the movie Hitman. Here's a quick synopsis. Gary Johnson is a seemingly normal professor, except for the fact that his side hustle is to go undercover for the New Orleans Police Department as a hitman. The film stars Glen Powell, Adria Arjona, Austin Emilio, Retta, and Sanjay Rao. Standout performances. Glen Powell is definitely having a moment, and there's been strong reactions to that moment. Some are saying, where have you been with this guy? He's been here for a while with 2016's Everybody Wants Some, 2018 Set It Up, and 2022's Top Gun Maverick, while others are just discovering him because of the hit romantic comedy Anyone But You, and it feels like that's the younger audience. Those are the people discovering him, so it makes sense that now is the time that Hollywood wants to turn this guy into a major movie star. And Hitman is far and away his biggest leading role yet. He's basically in all of it, and it's impressive, and after you watch the movie, you fully understand the hype around the young actor. Here's what Powell himself told In Styles' Dana Schwartz about the challenge of playing this part in Hitman. Quote, this is one where there was a lot of that imposter syndrome. That, I think, comes right before you start, where you convince a great filmmaker, one of the best to write a movie with you, you raise the money, you get an incredible actress, you con everybody on the way to joining this ride, and then you're like, I don't know if I can do this. You know what I mean? I think this was maybe the most nervous I've ever been going into a project, end quote. Not only is Powell the star of this movie, he's also the film's co-writer. This is a passion project for Glen Powell, and what a success it has been. Glen Powell's newfound fame is about to be tested as he's one of the stars of Twisters, the sequel to, you guessed it, the hit Twister. And I'm wary of this movie's box office because it's been rough on even good movies lately. I want to see this movie badly, but I don't know how many people feel the same way about a sequel to a movie from 30 years ago. We're about to see if Glen Powell's momentum can reach the box office. It's going to be really interesting. I first noticed Powell's co-star in Hitman, Adria Arjona, in J.C. Chandor's Triple Frontier, and again in Michael Bay's Six Underground, both films from 2019, and she's been in some big projects, Morbius, which didn't work at all, and Andor, which was a massive success. Hitman is without a doubt a breakout role. To say I was impressed with her was an understatement. She fully understood the tone of the movie she's in, and yes, the chemistry between her and Powell are undeniable, and something I loved is there's a real mystery about her character, which led to the suspense of the movie's ending. Arjona is next going to be in Zoe Kravitz's directorial debut, Blink Twice, with Naomi Ackie and Channing Tatum. Richard Linklater is clearly a director who likes to form collaborations with actors. He's worked with Ethan Hawke, Jack Black, and Matthew McConaughey numerous times, and many would say these actors have done their best work in his films, and now you can add Glen Powell, who along with Hitman worked with the director on Fast Food Nation, Everybody Wants Some, Apollo 10.5, and now Hitman, and you can make the exact same argument that Powell has never been better than when he's in a Linklater movie. I just recently rewatched Everybody Wants Some, and he's hilarious in that. And the dialogue he's giving is weirdly insightful. I feel like Richard Linklater movies get described as these hangout movies. I think these are movies about real life. Yes, the humor might be elevated, but the pacing of them, and I know that with Boyhood it was actually filmed in real time over decades. I understand that, but I think that is what the filmmaker is really trying to do with his movies, is to film real life and not make it feel like a movie. And you get that with most of his films. You can say, I could see this happening in real life. I could see this conversation happening in real life. And what I like most about his movies is his characters are not one thing. Like the Woodard character that made Matthew McConaughey famous, he's not just one thing. He can also be weirdly insightful at times, and I felt the same way about Glen Powell's character in Everybody Wants Some. He's more than just the guy chasing girls. he's also a good friend with interesting things to say. I guess what I'm saying is the characters in a Richard Linklater movie are multifaceted, and so are real-life human beings, and that's what Richard Linklater is going after with his movies. Many who have talked about the movie Hitman have asked the question, why would the guy who made Dazed and Confused make a plot-heavy movie like Hitman? And here's what I would say. The plot is pivotal to this film, but there is more than that. Just that in the movie there's a debate between Powell's Gary and his ex-wife about whether or not a person can change. I also think the courtroom scenes question the morality of Gary's side job. I think the movie Hitman is more than the plot. I think there is some real ideas in the movie as well. Like, can a person change is a big idea to explore in a movie like Hitman. While watching Hitman, I couldn't help but also think about David Fincher's The Killer. What Fincher did was make a sleek, funny, thrilling movie about a real killer, and what Linklater did was make one about a fake hitman and the idea of hitman altogether. Both made movies suited to their own strengths as filmmakers, and both made equally brilliant films, and I think both would struggle to make each other's movies. I also just look at these two, David Fincher and Richard Linklater, and I say these are guys who have made studio movies in the past with big cast. They both made movies with one signature star, and that's it. With Hitman, it's Glen Powell, and with The Killer, it was Michael Fassbender. Tilda Swinton's in there, Adria Arjona is in there, but these guys are making smaller movies. They are making movies that they want to make. They're not taking studio assignments. And look, Richard Linklater has probably never taken a studio assignment. The closer he's ever gotten was probably Bad News Bears or School of Rock. School of Rock is a magnificent film, by the way. One of the things I'm really left pondering is if in the future we are going to get filmmakers like Richard Linklater and David Fincher, guys who are able to develop to make their own movies. Because listen, Netflix is the only ones making movies like The Killer and Hitman. And that gets me to this. I do want to talk about the perception of a Netflix movie, because when you tell people about a Netflix movie, they think it's going to be really bad yet somewhat entertaining, starring a B-list movie star. Well, Netflix also has a history of making movies with really good filmmakers. Martin Scorsese, Noah Baumbach, David Fincher, and Richard Linklater. And they are letting these master filmmakers make the movies they want to make. But here's the real thing. They are letting these people make these movies because they are considered master filmmakers. In the future, will people be considered master filmmakers? In 10 years, is Netflix going to let Barry Jenkins or Damien Chazelle make whatever kind of movie they want to make? I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is that if Netflix stops doing it, it might end up stopping altogether, and that would be a really bad thing for the future of movies. And Linklater himself during the press for Hitman has been critical about the current state of movies, telling the BBC, quote, "You don't get fired for doing a sequel or an origin story, something that already exists. You don't get in trouble for what's obvious and commercial. What changed is that films got greenlit by the marketing department, and then it's become really safe choices," end quote. The fact of the matter is, any studio that wanted to could have bought the movie Hitman and put it into theaters, but the only entity that came through and made this movie happen was Netflix, and that's insanity. Why do studios not want to make a Richard Linklater movie? I mean, look at this guy's cachet. He makes movies that people talk about. Well, the answer to that is he makes movies that sometimes don't make a lot of money, and the movie business has become all about the money, even though the movies that cost a lot of money are no longer making a lot of money. Look at The Fall Guy, look at Furiosa. Nothing is a guaranteed hit anymore. And I know there are some people online talking about the fact that Hitman would have made money if it went out into theaters. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if people would see a new Glen Powell movie. We're about to find out with Twisters. If people don't go and see the movie Twisters, then how can you also say that they would have gone and seen Hitman? Like, I don't know the answer to all of the box office problems, but what I do know is that studios should give Richard Linklater money and let him make the movie he wants to make. I think they should just start focusing on the quality of these movies, and then at some point people will go and see them. I understand there's a business aspect to movies, but you should also want to be in the Richard Linklater business or the David Fincher business and make the movies that these guys want to make. And right now, the only people making the movies that these guys want to make is Netflix. So I find it really interesting when people are critical of Netflix. So Netflix won't release Knives Out 2 in movie theaters. Well, guess what? Rian Johnson agreed to make the Knives Out movies with Netflix. Oscar chances. Based on the critical reaction to this movie and the fact that it does have a 97% score on Rotten Tomatoes, whatever that means, I have to believe that this movie has legitimate Oscar chances. And I believe a Best Screenplay nomination is definitely in play. I've heard some people criticize the screenplay of this movie online. I think it's one of the best aspects of this movie. It's fast-paced, it really gets to the point, and it's a really thrilling movie where you don't really know how it's going to end. I would love to see Powell and Linklater get that nomination. I also think Arjona is up for a nomination for Best Supporting Actress. I could also see her getting a Best Leading Actress nomination, although I think she would have a far better chance in the supporting category. And it's very early in the year, but I could also see this movie getting a Best Picture nomination because there are 10 nominees, and at the end of the day, I believe this is going to be one of the 10 best movies to come out in the year 2024. Richard Linklater himself has a history of Oscar nominations with the Before movies and with Boyhood. He's an esteemed filmmaker, and there's a lot of talk about this movie because of the hype surrounding Glen Powell. So I feel like a lot of people are going to want to get Glen Powell to go to the Oscars, and the way you get him to go to the Oscars is to nominate his movie. I do think who is and who isn't becoming a movie star is becoming a really fascinating conversation, and the Glen Powell of it all is really interesting. Some people like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter write articles about this, about how this guy is becoming a movie star. And yes, that's somewhat true, but look at the movies that have been successful in his career. They've been with other major stars. I mean, Tom Cruise and Miles Teller were in Top Gun Maverick. Sydney Sweeney was also in Anyone But You with Glen Powell. I mean, there was major star power around Glen Powell. I think the question moving forward in the career of Glen Powell is this guy going to be able to carry a movie to box office success on his own? And Twisters is going to be the first case of that, because other than Daisy Edgar Jones and Anthony Ramos, there aren't that many established stars in that movie, and those two don't have box office success. So if Twisters is a big hit, I'm going to have to give Glen Powell a lot of credit for it being a big hit. And I think the other conversation around Glen Powell is the fact that many people think it's inevitable that he's going to get picked to be the lead of some major franchise movie. It was recently reported that he turned down the new Jurassic World movie. I have no idea if that's a good thing or not. They all think that he's going to end up in a Marvel movie or a DC movie. I've heard Glen Powell himself say he wants to play Batman. I don't think we need another Batman movie that doesn't star Robert Pattinson at this point. I think Powell should just continue to work with really good filmmakers like Richard Linklater, be consistent, and then those big opportunities will come with bigger filmmakers. Look at what happened with Timothée Chalamet. He had that quick rise, he had an Oscar nomination, and then when it was time to pick a franchise, he picked the right one because he picked one that was being made by a brilliant filmmaker in Denis Villeneuve. That's the path that Glen Powell should go down if he's able to get an opportunity like that. Don't just pick any old Marvel movie, any old DC movie, or any old Star Wars movie. Make sure that it is being made by a great filmmaker, and then it will likely end up being really good, because you know a lot of people are going to see the movie no matter what it is, but the real impact happens when the movie is really good. You get a ton of the credit. That's what's happening with Chalamet and Dune. That's what possibly could happen to Paul Mescal if Gladiator 2 is really good. He's going to get a ton of the credit, and he's going to get a career bump. But if the movie you pick fails, guess what? Your career is going to take a hit. This is a little bit of a side tangent, but I just feel like the choices for the franchises for these young actors to join is kind of bleak at this point. Like, I've been reading up on Austin Butler, that Austin Butler has been offered a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, that Austin Butler has been offered the Hercules movie for Disney. I mean, yes, there's a chance that those movies turn out good, but if they don't, I mean, where do you go after being in one of those movies? It's kind of like an all or nothing scenario, a no-win situation, because if you're in one of those movies that everyone sees and is really bad, where do you go from there? I just feel like actors used to have better choices for bigger movies to star in. Like, Matt Damon could be in the Ocean 11 movies and be in the Bourne films, movies that everyone saw that were going to be really high quality. Glen Powell doesn't seemingly have those kind of options. Maybe his big franchise movies are just romantic comedies. Maybe he goes down the path of Matthew McConaughey. Like, you just make 5 romantic comedies and then you occasionally star in a Richard Linklater movie that a lot of people talk about and give you critical acclaim for. Like, I could see him going down a career path like that because the franchise movies may be at a dead end. Yes, you occasionally get the actor getting the right franchise like Timothée Chalamet with Dune, but for every one of those, there's also a million disaster stories of this A-list actor getting a franchise and then it not working out. So I think the varieties and the Hollywood Reporters of the world would have you believe that this is the beginning of the rise of Glen Powell. I actually think that this could be the pinnacle of his career, in that this is what it's going to be from now on. I'm not sure he's going to be the lead of a billion-dollar franchise. He could be the side character in a movie that makes $1 billion, like in Top Gun Maverick, but I don't think we'll be talking about a movie where Glen Powell is carrying it and it makes $1 billion. I could be wrong on that. I think Hollywood is going to give him a chance, but I think that chance might be a huge swing and a miss depending on what big franchise he ends up joining, because I do believe it is inevitable he's going to pick a franchise. It just has to be the right one. What I personally want right now is a Richard Linklater movie that stars Glen Powell, Matthew McConaughey, Ethan Hawke, and Jack Black. Like, get all of his collaborators in one movie, because he gets the best out of these actors, and you want to see these actors share the screen with one another. You want to see Glen Powell on screen with Matthew McConaughey. You want to see Glen Powell with Ethan Hawke, and you definitely want to see Glen Powell with Jack Black. And that's the kind of movie that could make money and be in theaters. If Richard Linklater could make a studio movie with those guys, people would go and see it. Linklater is the best kind of filmmaker in that he's really consistent. All of his movies are really interesting and they're really entertaining and they're fun to watch, but he's also surprising. Like, I watch a movie like Hitman and I go, this really isn't all of that connected to your past work, yet at the same time it is. And it's hard to talk about the filmography of a director like this because all anybody wants to talk about are those early classics, the Before trilogy and Dazed and Confused. And listen, I get that. Those movies are going to live till the end of time, but you gotta give the man credit for the movies he's making right now. I thought Apollo 10.5 should have been nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. That was one of the best films of that year. I loved everything about that movie. That movie was filled with nostalgia, and that's something that you see in a lot of his movies, is that nostalgia factor. And I think with Hitman, he's made one of his best films. I mean, this is going to be a top 5 Richard Linklater movie for me, one that I'm probably going to end up revisiting. In conclusion, I have no idea what career path Glen Powell is going to go down, but what I hope for the young actor is that he continues to star in Richard Linklater movies because he gives his best performances in them. And the biggest strength of this movie, Hitman, is the plot and the dialogue and the chemistry between the characters. characters. Hitman is as good as everyone is saying, and I believe at the end of the year it is going to be recognized as one of the best movies of 2024. It's Glen Powell at his best and one of the best of Richard Linklater's revered filmography. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I highly recommend you check out the movie Hitman. Next week on the podcast, I'm talking about Rose Glass's Love Lies Bleeding, starring Kristen Stewart, Katie O'Brien, and Ed Harris. So tune into that and please rate, review, and subscribe.